The celebrated astronomer Tycho Brahe, a man who charted the cosmos with unparalleled precision, did not meet his end by an assassin's blade, a tragic fall from his observatory, or some exotic, unknown disease. Instead, he succumbed to an excruciatingly strange and utterly preventable demise. He died because he was too polite to excuse himself from a lavish banquet to relieve his bladder. It sounds like a macabre joke, a darkly comedic twist of fate, but this was the very real, agonizing end for one of history's most brilliant yet deeply eccentric scientific minds. In an era when the heavens themselves seemed to bend to his gaze, a simple bodily function, ignored out of rigid social decorum, became his undoing, leaving behind a legacy forever intertwined with an ending that still, centuries later, beggars belief. But who was this man, Tycho Brahe, whose death proved stranger than fiction? Born into Danish nobility in 1546, Brahe was a prodigy, gripped by the stars from an early age. He was a force of nature, meticulously cataloging over 1,000 stars with an accuracy unmatched before the invention of the telescope. Imagine, in the late 16th century, a man charting celestial movements from his grand observatory on the island of heaven, equipped with colossal brass instruments and a boundless curiosity. He wasn't just observing, he was redefining our understanding of the universe, proving, for example, that comets weren't atmospheric phenomena, but cosmic travelers, challenging the very foundations of Aristotelian cosmology. Yet, Brahe was as famous for his eccentricities as he was for his brilliance. He had a pet elk that reportedly died after falling down a flight of stairs after drinking too much beer. He believed in alchemy and astrology, housing a dwarf named Jeppe at his castle, whom he believed possessed prophetic powers. Perhaps most famously, he lost part of his nose in a duel with a distant cousin over a mathematical formula, thereafter wearing a sophisticated prosthetic made of silver and gold. This was a man of immense intellect, towering ego, and a penchant for the dramatic, living a life of both scientific rigor and almost fantastical indulgence. But even for a man who seemed to defy earthly conventions, certain societal rules were apparently inviolable. His groundbreaking work and often contentious personality eventually led to friction with the Danish king, compelling him to seek patronage elsewhere. In 1599, Brahe found a new home in Prague, under the protection of the Holy Roman Emperor Rudolf II. Rudolf, a notoriously reclusive and mystical monarch, was captivated by alchemy, astrology, and the occult, pursuits that perfectly aligned with Brahe's more esoteric interests. This was a golden age for Brahe, a chance to continue his life's work unburdened by political squabbles, surrounded by the intellectual ferment of Rudolf's court. Prague, at the turn of the 17th century, was a melting pot of scholars, artists, alchemists, and philosophers, drawn by the emperor's eccentric patronage. The imperial court was a spectacle of power and pageantry. Life revolved around elaborate feasts, political maneuvering, and a dizzying array of intellectual pursuits. For a man of Brahe's stature, attending these banquets was not merely a social obligation, it was a testament to his elevated status, a demonstration of his close ties to the emperor himself. These were not casual gatherings. Every gesture, every utterance, every adherence to a rigid code of conduct spoke volumes about one's standing. What unspoken pressures, then, were truly at play on that fateful night? It was October 13, 1601. Brahe, then 54 years old, was attending a particularly grand banquet at the home of Baron of Rosenberg, a prominent nobleman in Prague. The hall would have shimmered with candlelight, reflecting off gilded platters and the jewels of the assembled dignitaries. The air, thick with the scent of roasted game, spiced wines, and perfume, would have resonated with the clatter of silver and the murmur of polite conversation, punctuated by bursts of laughter. Brahe, ever the center of attention, would have been seated at a place of honor, perhaps near the head of the table, his silver nose catching the light, a silent testament to his storied past. As the hours passed, course after elaborate course was served, accompanied by an endless flow of potent wines. The atmosphere grew increasingly convivial, the conversation livelier. Yet, as the feast stretched on, a growing discomfort began to grip Brahe. He felt a pressing need, a natural biological urge, to relieve himself. But the strict etiquette of the time, especially within such an exalted company, dictated that one should never leave the table before the host. To do so would have been an unthinkable breach of decorum, an insult to his generous host, and a profound embarrassment in the eyes of his peers and, most importantly, the emperor's representatives. Imagine the internal struggle. On one hand, the overwhelming physical need, a primal urge that grew more insistent with every passing minute. On the other, the invisible chains of social expectation forged from centuries of aristocratic tradition. Brahe, a man who dared to challenge the very structure of the cosmos, found himself trapped by the most mundane of earthly conventions. He was known for his prodigious drinking, and this night was no exception. With each goblet of wine, the pressure inside him mounted, a slow, inexorable torment building beneath his finery. He would have shifted uncomfortably, his mind surely racing. Could he risk public humiliation? The eyes of the court were on him, a renowned figure, yet utterly vulnerable to a simple human failing. The banquet finally concluded, and Brahe, with immense relief, was at last free to attend to his urgent need. But the damage, it seems, was already done. The extraordinary retention had taken its toll. As he left the banquet hall and tried to relieve himself, he found himself unable to do so properly. The excruciating pressure had likely caused an injury, a profound distension, or perhaps even a rupture within his bladder. This wasn't just discomfort, it was a profound, life-threatening trauma that the medical knowledge of the era was utterly unprepared to address. Over the next few days, his condition rapidly deteriorated. He was confined to his bed, racked with unimaginable pain. The medical understanding of the 17th century was, by modern standards, primitive. Doctors, though well-meaning, were powerless against such an internal affliction. They would have tried various remedies, poultices, tinctures, perhaps even attempting to drain his bladder, all likely exacerbating his suffering rather than alleviating it. The grand halls of his home, once filled with instruments and discoveries, now echoed with his moans, a stark contrast to the quiet celestial observations that had defined his life. For 11 agonizing days, Brahe lay dying. His body, once robust, was now betraying him, a slow, torturous collapse. His fever would have raged, his mind, usually so sharp and analytical, perhaps clouded by delirium and pain. Can you imagine the frustration, the bitter irony of such a brilliant mind realizing his end was brought about by such an absurd circumstance? He, who had measured the distances to the stars, was now powerless against the most basic biological failure. According to his assistant, the brilliant young Johannes Kepler, who would later inherit Brahe's vast and invaluable astronomical data, Brahe's last coherent words were a repeated phrase in Latin, ne frustra vixesse videar, which translates to, "Let me not seem to have lived in vain." A profound plea, uttered by a man whose final moments were overshadowed by an almost farcical tragedy. He was worried, even on his deathbed, about his legacy, about the impact of his life's work, knowing that he was departing under such ignominious circumstances. On October 24, 1601, just shy of 2 weeks after that ill-fated banquet, Tycho Brahe breathed his last. The exact medical cause is often attributed to uremia, a buildup of toxins in the blood due to kidney failure, brought on by the ruptured or severely damaged bladder. The air in his death chamber would have been heavy with the stench of sickness, the hushed whispers of his family and attendants, and the faint, melancholic tolling of distant church bells. The great astronomer, the man with the silver nose, whose eyes had pierced the veil of the cosmos, was gone, not with a bang, but with a whimper, a slow, agonizing fade into the silence. The irony of Tycho Brahe's death is almost unbearable. This was a man whose observations provided the empirical data that Johannes Kepler used to formulate his laws of planetary motion, laws that fundamentally reshaped astronomy and paved the way for Isaac Newton's universal gravitation. Brahe's life work was instrumental in dismantling the Ptolemaic geocentric model and laying the groundwork for a heliocentric universe. Yet his demise was not grand or heroic, but tragically, comically, and utterly human. His meticulous, lifelong pursuit of cosmic truth ended not in a blaze of glory, but in a slow, painful surrender to a biological function ignored for the sake of social grace. His passing left a gaping hole in the scientific world, a void that Kepler, with Brahe's hard-won data, would heroically fill, albeit with a profound sense of loss for his mentor. So what does Brahe's strange death teach us beyond a morbid curiosity? It's a powerful, almost unsettling reminder of the profound impact of culture and social norms on even the most fundamental aspects of human life. In an age of strict hierarchies and rigid etiquette, the fear of social embarrassment could literally override the instinct for self-preservation. It speaks to the human condition, our vulnerabilities, and the often absurd intersection of our physiology with the constructs we build around ourselves. Perhaps it's a lesson in humility, a recognition that even the greatest minds are bound by the most basic biological realities. Or perhaps it simply stands as one of history's most bizarre footnotes, a cautionary tale whispered across centuries. Tycho Brahe, the visionary who measured the heavens, eventually became a prisoner of his own bladder, a victim of his era's unyielding social code. His story forces us to confront the peculiar, often uncomfortable truths about humanity. Our immense capacity for intellect and discovery, juxtaposed with our equally immense capacity for self-imposed limitations and absurd adherence to convention. His death, a strange symphony of brilliance, ego, and bodily function, remains one of history's most unforgettable and indeed most speechless-inducing ends. It asks us, quietly, to consider the unseen rules that govern our own lives, and whether, sometimes, the simple act of excusing ourselves might be the wisest choice of all. His stars live on, but his exit remains a testament to the fact that even for those who gaze at eternity, sometimes the most profound dramas unfold within the most confined spaces.